The Manhattan skyline glittered like a sea of stars, its lights dancing across the glass walls of Ethan Caldwell's penthouse, a testament to his life as a single-dad millionaire. Below, New York pulsed with ambition, but up here, a question hung heavy in the air. What could push a man like Ethan, a charismatic titan who had everything, to wager his heart on a reckless bet? As a single-dad millionaire, his world was one of tailored suits and fleeting romances. Yet Ava Bennett's shadow loomed, mysterious, unshakable, her eyes hiding a secret that could unravel him. Their collision promised a storm of passion and betrayal, where love and vengeance intertwined. Each glance between them sparked a dangerous dance, one that could shatter Ethan's carefully built empire. A heart-pounding truth waited in the wings, ready to rewrite their story. Follow this channel to uncover the shocking secrets that will leave you breathless. The autumn of 2025 draped Manhattan in a crisp, golden veil, where the city's heartbeat pulsed through its towering spires and restless streets. Inside the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, New York's elite gathered under a canopy of decadence, their world a glittering mirage of power and privilege. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars, casting a warm, amber glow over the gala, where the soft clink of champagne flutes and ripples of polished laughter wove a tapestry of untouchable wealth. At the center of this opulent stage stood Ethan Caldwell, a single-dad millionaire whose presence was as commanding as the city itself. His tailored tuxedo hugged his frame with effortless precision, and his easy smirk, sharp, practiced, drew every eye in the room. Ethan was a man sculpted by ambition, his life a masterpiece of curated perfection. Sprawling penthouses that kissed the clouds, a daughter, Lily, tucked safely in an elite boarding school, and a parade of glamorous women who chased his wealth but never reached his heart. As a single-dad millionaire, he thrived on control, his arrogance a polished armor forged in the crucible of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. Yet, beneath the charisma, a quiet restlessness stirred, a hunger for something beyond the hollow victories that defined his empire. The air in the ballroom shimmered with the soft hum of a jazz quartet, its notes weaving through the crowd like a velvet thread. Ethan stood tall, a king in his domain, his green eyes scanning the room with the instincts of a predator. The elite parted instinctively as Nathan Reed, his oldest friend and a fellow titan of industry, approached, a glint of mischief dancing in his gaze. Nathan knew Ethan's soul, every ambition, every flaw. And tonight, he wielded that knowledge with the precision of a master chess player. Over the quartet's sultry melody, he leaned close, his voice a low, electrifying whisper that cut through the gala's din. The challenge was audacious, a bet as bold as the city itself. Ethan, the untouchable single-dad millionaire, would marry a woman unlike his usual conquests, someone immune to his wealth, unshaken by his charm, and sustain the marriage for 6 months. The prize was $1 million, a trifling sum for men who measured success in empires. But the true stakes were far weightier: pride, power, and the chance to prove Ethan's invincibility. Ethan's laughter sliced through the air, sharp and unyielding, his ego alight with the thrill of a new conquest. He accepted without a flicker of doubt, his confidence a beacon that lit the room, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Days later, Manhattan's pulse quickened, its neon veins glowing against the dusk as Ethan stepped into a sleek restaurant on the Upper East Side. The space was a study in understated luxury, its dim lighting casting long, velvet shadows across polished marble floors. The air buzzed with a quiet anticipation, the clink of silver cutlery and murmur of hushed conversations, a subtle prelude to a moment that would shift the axis of Ethan's world. At a corner table, Ava Bennett waited, her presence a gathering tempest, as if the city itself held its breath. Unlike the glossy socialites who fawned over Ethan's wealth, Ava radiated a confidence that was raw, unpolished, and utterly disarming. Her dark eyes locked onto his with a clarity that pierced his carefully crafted facade, and her simple yet elegant dress, satin flowing like liquid moonlight, spoke of a woman who needed no adornment to command attention. Her posture was relaxed yet defiant, a silent declaration that she played by her own rules, and Ethan, the single-dad millionaire accustomed to adoration, felt the ground tilt beneath him. Their meeting crackled with tension, A spark struck between flint and steel. Ava wasted no time, her words slicing through the veneer of pleasantries with a precision that left Ethan reeling. She knew about the bet, every detail, every stake, and her acknowledgement was not capitulation but a gauntlet thrown at his feet. "I'm not here to be won," she said, calm, piercing, her voice a quiet blade that cut through his charm. Ethan's smile faltered, his usual arsenal of wit and wealth rendered useless under her unflinching gaze. She spoke of their 6-month marriage as a contract, a game she'd play on her terms, but her motives remained shrouded in shadow. Was it the $1 million prize, a hunger for revenge, or something deeper, carved into the faint sadness that flickered across her features, like a storm cloud passing over a clear sky? Ethan, ever the strategist, saw her as a riddle to unravel, a challenge to master, but a quiet unease settled in his chest, a whisper that Ava was no ordinary opponent. Their conversation unfolded like a duel, each word a carefully placed step in a dance of power and intrigue. Ava's wit was sharp, her responses laced with a defiance that both infuriated and captivated Ethan. She spoke little of herself, deflecting his probing questions with a smile that promised secrets he couldn't yet touch. Ethan, the single dad millionaire, was used to bending the world to his will, but Ava's resistance was a force he couldn't charm or buy. Her dark eyes held a story, one etched in pain and purpose, and the faint tremor in her voice when she mentioned games like yours sent a shiver down his spine. He pressed for more, his curiosity sharpening, but Ava remained a locked vault, her motives cloaked in a mystery that felt as vast as the city itself. As their dinner drew to a close, the restaurant's ambiance softened, the clatter of dishes fading into a gentle hum. Outside, Manhattan's neon glow filtered through towering windows, painting the room in hues of sapphire and gold. Ava rose, her movements graceful yet deliberate, her silhouette framed against the skyline like a figure from a dream. Ethan watched, caught in a pull he couldn't name, a mix of fascination and foreboding, as if he'd stepped onto a tightrope stretched over an abyss. She offered a final glance, her eyes a storm of promise and peril, and the weight of that look lingered long after she'd gone. The distant wail of a saxophone drifted through the night, its mournful notes weaving into the city's pulse, a requiem for the certainty Ethan had once held. He lingered at the table, the remnants of their meal a silent witness to the shift in his world. The single dad millionaire had entered a game he believed he could dominate, but Ava's presence was a shadow that refused to fade. Her cryptic glance, her knowing smile, her unshakable resolve, they hinted at a truth buried deep, one heavy enough to crack the foundations of his empire. The restaurant's lights dimmed, the city's glow growing sharper beyond the glass, and Ethan felt the weight of her absence like a physical ache. As he stepped into the elevator, its doors closing with a soft hiss, a faint echo of Ava's footsteps lingered in his mind, a whisper of the storm she'd unleashed. Somewhere in Manhattan's labyrinth, a secret waited, its edges sharp enough to redraw the lines of his carefully controlled life. The city hummed on, indifferent to the battle brewing, and Ethan, for the first time, sensed he might not emerge unscathed. Manhattan's opulent restaurants glittered under the weight of their own grandeur, their polished surfaces reflecting the ambitions of New York's elite. Ethan Caldwell, a single dad millionaire, moved through these spaces with the ease of a man born to rule them. His world was one of crisp white tablecloths, Michelin-starred menus, and the soft clink of crystal glasses, a stage where he played the part of the untouchable titan. Yet, as he escorted Ava Bennett through these gilded halls, his usual arsenal of charm and wealth seemed to falter. Ava, with her sharp wit and unyielding independence, stood apart from the women who typically melted under his gaze. Her eyes, dark and discerning, scanned the lavish surroundings with a quiet detachment, as if the extravagance was a language she refused to speak. Ethan, ever the strategist, doubled down on his efforts. He gifted her a diamond bracelet, its facets catching the light like tiny stars, and offered reservations at the city's most exclusive venues. Each gesture was a calculated move, designed to draw Ava into his orbit as a single dad millionaire. But Ava's responses were a study in restraint. She'd trace the bracelet's edge with a fingertip, her smile polite but distant, and decline his invitations with a grace that stung more than rejection. "I prefer places with soul," she'd said once, her voice soft but firm, leaving Ethan to grapple with the unfamiliar sensation of being outmaneuvered. Her insistence on independence wasn't just defiance, it was a challenge, one that sparked a flicker of curiosity in his guarded heart. Their dynamics shifted when Ava suggested a meeting at a cozy Brooklyn cafe, a world away from Manhattan's polished veneer. The cafe, tucked between weathered brownstones, smelled of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, its mismatched chairs and warm lighting a quiet rebellion against Ethan's usual haunts. Here, Ava seemed to exhale, her shoulders softening as she sipped tea from a chipped ceramic mug. Ethan, in his tailored coat, felt oddly out of place, yet the simplicity of the setting coaxed a different side of him to the surface. He found himself sharing a rare story about his daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed girl whose drawings still adorned his office despite her absence at boarding school. Ava listened, her gaze softening, and for a moment, the single-dad millionaire was just a man, vulnerable in his love for his child. Their conversations began to weave a delicate thread of connection. Ava's wit shone in the cafe's warm glow, her laughter a melody that caught Ethan off guard. She spoke of books she loved, of quiet walks in Central Park, and of dreams that didn't hinge on wealth. A life Ethan had never known. Yet beneath her warmth, cryptic hints surfaced, like shadows moving under still water. Once, as she stirred her tea, she murmured about losses tied to men like him, her voice carrying a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. He pressed for clarity, but Ava deflected with a smile, her eyes guarding a truth he couldn't yet reach. The ambiguity stirred a restless intrigue in him, a need to unravel the enigma she presented. Their meetings oscillated between Manhattan's grandeur and Brooklyn's intimacy, each setting peeling back layers of their guarded selves. In a dimly lit jazz club, Ethan watched Ava sway to a saxophone's mournful notes, her silhouette a study in grace against the smoky air. He felt a pull, a longing to bridge the distance between them, but her independence held firm, a wall he couldn't scale with gifts or charm. At the cafe, she'd tease him about his reliance on luxury, her words sharp but playful, and Ethan found himself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in years. The single-dad millionaire, so accustomed to control, was beginning to crave her presence, her defiance, her mystery. Lily's brief appearance during a weekend visit added a new dimension to their dance. The 10-year-old, with her father's green eyes and a shy smile, met Ava at the cafe, clutching a sketchbook. Ava knelt to her level, admiring a drawing of a starry sky, and the tenderness in her voice struck Ethan like a chord. For a moment, he saw Ava not as an opponent in a bet, but as a woman who could belong in his world, not the one of wealth, but the one of quiet moments with his daughter. The image lingered, softening the edges of his ambition, but Ava's guarded glances reminded him of the secrets she held. As weeks passed, the city's rhythm seemed to pulse in time with their growing connection. Late-night walks along the Hudson River saw Ethan shedding his arrogance, his stories of boardroom battles giving way to confessions of loneliness. Ava, too, shared fragments of herself, her love for old vinyl records, her habit of counting stars to calm her mind, but always stopped short of revealing the pain that flickered in her eyes. Her cryptic references to "what men like you take" haunted Ethan, planting seeds of doubt about his past as a single-dad millionaire. Had he crossed paths with her before, in a deal he couldn't recall? The question gnawed at him, a quiet storm brewing beneath their fragile bond. One evening, as rain streaked the cafe's windows, Ava lingered over her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken truths. Ethan watched her, his heart caught between admiration and unease, sensing that their game was shifting into dangerous territory. She looked up, her gaze piercing, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The patter of rain against glass mingled with the soft strum of a guitar from the cafe's speakers, a melody that felt like a warning. Ava's hands stilled, and in her silence, Ethan felt the weight of a truth waiting to surface. A truth that could either bind them closer or tear them apart. As she rose to leave, her coat brushing against the table, a faint clink echoed, like a key dropping to the floor, hinting at secrets yet to be unlocked. The sprawling penthouse of Ethan Caldwell, perched high above Manhattan's glittering skyline, was a monument to his triumphs as a single-dad millionaire. Its floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's restless pulse, but within those walls, the air grew heavy with tension, as if the very space could sense the storm brewing. By late October 2025, the veneer of Ethan's carefully orchestrated marriage to Ava Bennett had begun to crack. The luxurious rooms, once a stage for his attempts to dazzle her, now felt like a battlefield where every glance and gesture carried the weight of unspoken truths. The soft glow of a chandelier cast long shadows across marble floors, and the distant hum of the city below seemed to mock the silence that stretched between them. Ethan, ever the single-dad millionaire accustomed to bending the world to his will, had escalated his efforts to control Ava. He filled her days with extravagance, private dinners at rooftop venues, designer gowns delivered to their door, even a chauffeured car to shadow her every move. Each act was a calculated thread in the web he wove, designed to tether her to his world of wealth and power. But Ava remained an enigma, her independence a steel core that refused to yield. She'd accept his gifts with a nod, her fingers brushing the silk of a dress or the cool metal of a car key, only to set them aside with a quiet resolve that unnerved him. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, seemed to see through his maneuvers, and Ethan felt the unfamiliar sting of being outmatched in a game he thought he ruled. The tension simmered through their days, a slow burn that erupted one late night in the penthouse's expansive living room. Ethan stood by the window, the city's lights reflecting in his eyes, his posture rigid with frustration. Ava sat across the room, her silhouette framed against a velvet sofa, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm in his chest. He'd just returned from a call with Nathan, his best friend, who'd laughed off Ethan's complaints about Ava's resistance, urging him to tighten his grip. "She's just a challenge, Ethan," Nathan had said, his voice laced with amusement. But to Ethan, the single-dad millionaire, Ava was no longer just a bet. She was a force that threatened to unravel the control he'd spent years perfecting. The confrontation began with a spark, ignited by Ethan's attempt to dictate Ava's schedule. He'd insisted she attend a high-profile charity gala, a move to parade her as his wife and cement his dominance. Ava's refusal was swift, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm not your trophy, Ethan," she said, her words measured but laced with fire, defiant. The accusation hung in the air, and Ethan's jaw tightened, his instinct to assert control clashing with the unease her defiance stirred. He stepped closer, his voice low, pressing her to explain her resistance, to bend to the life he offered as a single-dad millionaire. But Ava rose, her movements deliberate, and met his gaze with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. What followed was a cascade of raw emotion, a floodgate opened by Ava's refusal to play his game. She paced the room, her steps echoing on the marble, and her words began to unravel the facade Ethan had built. She spoke of his ruthless past, of the companies he'd crushed in his climb to power, her voice trembling with a pain that cut deeper than he expected. Each syllable was a mirror, forcing Ethan to confront the cost of his ambition. Then, in a moment that felt like the world tilting, Ava revealed a shard of her truth. Her father's company had been one of Ethan's casualties, a small firm swallowed whole in a deal he barely remembered. The loss had shattered her family, leaving scars that time hadn't healed. Ethan stood frozen, the city's lights blurring beyond the glass as Ava's words sank in. Her father's company, a name, a deal, a footnote in his empire, had been the cornerstone of her world. The accusation wasn't just about business. It was personal, a wound she carried in every glance, every guarded smile. Ava's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a fierce resolve, and Ethan felt his confidence fracture. The single-dad millionaire, who thrived on control, was suddenly adrift, his moral compass spinning wildly. He wanted to argue, to defend the choices that had built his empire, but the weight of her pain silenced him. For the first time, he saw himself through her eyes, a man whose victories came at a cost he'd never bothered to measure. The argument left the room charged with a brittle silence, the kind that follows a storm. Ava turned away, her silhouette retreating to the edge of the penthouse, where the city's glow seemed to swallow her. Ethan remained rooted, his mind racing to reconcile the man he was with the one Ava described. Nathan's brief appearance earlier that evening, his casual dismissal of Ava's strength, now felt like a miscalculation. Ethan had underestimated her, assuming she'd bend like others before her. But Ava was different. Her pain was a fire that burned brighter than his wealth, and her knowledge of his past was a weapon she wielded with precision. As the night deepened, the penthouse felt colder, its opulence a hollow echo of Ethan's shaken resolve. He replayed Ava's words, each one a stone in the foundation of his guilt. The single-dad millionaire had always seen himself as invincible, but Ava's revelation had cracked that illusion, exposing vulnerabilities he'd buried beneath layers of success. She hadn't just challenged his control, she'd forced him to question his morality, his legacy, and the man he'd become for his daughter, Lily. The city outside pulsed on, indifferent to the turmoil within. But Ethan felt the ground shifting beneath him, a prelude to a reckoning he couldn't escape. Ava's departure from the room was quiet, her steps fading into the penthouse's vastness, but her presence lingered like a specter. Ethan moved to the bar, pouring a drink he didn't touch, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Manhattan's lights blurred into the night. The soft clink of ice against glass was the only sound, a fragile counterpoint to the chaos in his mind. Somewhere in the shadows, a door clicked shut, its echo carrying a promise of truths yet to be uncovered. Ava knew more than she'd revealed, and Ethan, for the first time, feared what those secrets might cost him. Manhattan's corporate towers loomed like sentinels in the November chill of 2025, their glass facades reflecting the relentless ambition of men like Ethan Caldwell. As a single-dad millionaire, Ethan had built an empire within these walls, his office a fortress of power where deals were struck and futures decided. But now, the air carried a faint tremor of instability, as if the foundations of his world were beginning to crack. Outside, the city's streets wound through shadows, their dim glow casting an uneasy pallor over late-night encounters. The hum of traffic mingled with the distant wail of a siren, a restless soundtrack to a drama unfolding in the heart of New York. Ethan's days had grown jagged since Ava's revelation about her father's ruined company. The single-dad millionaire, once unshakable, now navigated his empire with a wariness that bordered on paranoia. His latest business ventures, lucrative contracts poised to solidify his dominance, began to falter inexplicably. Partners withdrew at the last moment, documents vanished, and whispers of sabotage circled his boardroom like vultures. Ethan's instincts, honed by years of outmaneuvering rivals, pointed to Ava. Her cryptic words from their last confrontation echoed in his mind, her pain a blade that cut deeper with each failed deal. Was she orchestrating this chaos, dismantling his world as he had once dismantled hers? The thought gnawed at him, a splinter of doubt that refused to dislodge. Ava, meanwhile, moved through their shared life with a deliberate distance, her presence in the penthouse a quiet storm. She'd attend their obligatory dinners, her elegance a stark contrast to the tension that simmered beneath her calm exterior. Ethan watched her, searching for signs of guilt or intent, but her eyes revealed nothing, their depths guarding secrets he couldn't breach. Her independence, once a spark that drew him closer, now felt like a wall, each interaction a reminder of the chasm widening between them. As a single-dad millionaire, Ethan was accustomed to bending others to his will, but Ava's resolve was a force he couldn't tame, and the uncertainty it bred was a torment he hadn't anticipated. The arrival of a shadowy figure from Ava's past shattered the fragile equilibrium. One evening, as Ethan reviewed faltering contracts in his office, Ava slipped out into Manhattan's labyrinthine streets. The city's pulse seemed to quicken as she met her mother, Eleanor, in a dimly lit diner tucked beneath a flickering neon sign. Eleanor's face, etched with years of hardship, carried the weight of their shared history. Her voice, low and urgent, wove a tale of ruin tied to Ethan's ruthless ambition. She spoke of Ava's father, a man broken by the loss of his company, and of the family's descent into despair after Ethan's takeover. "He's poison, Ava," she warned, desperate, her words a plea wrapped in fear. Eleanor's presence was a ghost from a past Ava had tried to outrun, her warnings a mirror to the pain Ava carried but hadn't fully revealed. Ava listened, her fingers tightening around a chipped coffee mug, the diner's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her face. Eleanor's words stirred memories of sleepless nights, of a home stripped bare by debt, of a father whose laughter had faded long before his life did. Yet beneath the pain, Ava's resolve hardened. She hadn't entered this marriage blindly. Every step was a thread in a plan she guarded fiercely. But Eleanor's warning planted a seed of doubt, a question of whether her pursuit of justice would cost her more than she'd bargained. The city outside the diner hummed, its lights blurring through rain-streaked windows, a restless backdrop to the turmoil within her. Ethan's suspicions reached a boiling point when he noticed Ava's absence that night. Driven by a mix of frustration and dread, he tracked her to the diner, his silhouette looming in the doorway as he caught a glimpse of her with Eleanor. The sight of Ava's mother, a stranger whose face carried an eerie familiarity, sent a jolt through him. Was this the source of Ava's vendetta? The single dad millionaire, so adept at reading boardrooms, felt blind in this personal battlefield. He didn't approach, retreating instead into the shadows of Manhattan's streets, the cold biting at his skin as he grappled with the implications. The city's pulse seemed to mock him, its neon glow a stark contrast to the darkness closing in. Their confrontation came days later, in the penthouse's sterile glow, where the city's skyline watched like a silent jury. Ethan's voice was a low growl, his accusations sharp as he demanded answers about her mother and the crumbling deals. Ava stood by the window, her back to him, the glass reflecting her unyielding composure. She didn't deny his suspicions, but her responses were cryptic, woven with half-truths that deepened the rift between them. "You built your empire on ruins, Ethan," she said, resolute, her words a quiet indictment that left him reeling. The single dad millionaire felt his control slipping, each syllable from Ava a reminder of the power she wielded, not through wealth, but through truth. The argument ended in a suffocating silence, the penthouse's vastness amplifying their isolation. Ava retreated to her room, her steps deliberate, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of his unraveling world. He paced the living room, the city's lights a kaleidoscope of chaos beyond the glass. The failures in his business, once a mere annoyance, now felt like a noose tightening around his legacy. Ava's mother, her warnings, and Ava's own cryptic defiance wove a web he couldn't untangle. The single dad millionaire had always thrived on certainty, but now doubt was his constant companion, a shadow that followed him through Manhattan's sleepless nights. As Ethan stood by the window, the distant wail of a saxophone drifted up from the streets, a mournful echo of the city's heartbeat. His thoughts churned, replaying Eleanor's face, Ava's words, and the deals slipping through his fingers. The truth, he sensed, was closer than ever, but its shape remained elusive, a puzzle with pieces he couldn't yet fit together. In the silence, a faint creak broke the stillness. A door left ajar in the penthouse's depths, its sound a whisper of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Ethan's heart pounded, the city's pulse syncing with his own, as he realized Ava's plan was far from finished. The penthouse of Ethan Caldwell, a single dad millionaire, stood like a glass cathedral above Manhattan, its sleek surfaces reflecting the restless shimmer of New York's skyline. By late November 2025, the opulent space felt more like a cage, its vastness amplifying the tension that pulsed between Ethan and Ava Bennett. The city below thrummed with life, but within these walls, every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every silence a challenge. Beyond the penthouse, Central Park at dusk offered a quieter stage, its leafless trees silhouetted against a sky bruised with hues of violet and gold. The park's winding paths, dusted with the first frost, whispered of solitude and revelation, a stark contrast to the corporate battlefield Ethan once ruled. Ethan's world, meticulously built as a single dad millionaire, was unraveling. The faltering business deals, Ava's cryptic defiance, and the haunting image of her mother's warning had left him grasping for control. Doubt, a stranger to his ironclad confidence, now clung to him like damp air. Determined to reclaim the upper hand, he hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Vincent, whose weathered face and clipped efficiency promised answers. Vincent's task was simple: unearth Ava's past, piece together the puzzle of her motives, and confirm whether she was the architect of Ethan's crumbling empire. Ethan paced his office, the city's lights a kaleidoscope beyond the glass, as Vincent delivered his first report. The words hit like a blow. Ava's father, Thomas Bennett, had owned a small tech firm, a family legacy crushed under Ethan's aggressive takeover a decade ago. The fallout had driven Thomas to despair, his suicide a final act of surrender. The revelation settled over Ethan like ash, heavy and suffocating. He stood motionless, the investigator's file open on his desk, its pages detailing a life he'd inadvertently destroyed. Thomas's firm had been a footnote in Ethan's climb to power, a deal closed without a second thought. Now, that footnote was a wound, bleeding into the present. As a single-dad millionaire, Ethan had always justified his ruthlessness as necessary, a means to secure a future for his daughter, Lily. But Ava's pain, rooted in his actions, forced him to confront the human cost of his empire. Guilt, sharp and unfamiliar, gnawed at him, and the penthouse's sterile glow offered no comfort. The distant wail of a violin from a street performer below seemed to mourn the man Ethan had been, the man he could no longer ignore. Ava, sensing Ethan's probing, moved with a quiet cunning that deepened the mystery. She left subtle clues, each one a thread in the tapestry of her plan. One evening, as Ethan entered the penthouse's living room, he found a locket on the coffee table, its silver surface worn but warm to the touch. Inside was a faded photo of a young Ava with her father, their smiles a snapshot of a happiness Ethan had shattered. The locket wasn't an accident. It was a message, a silent accusation that pierced deeper than words. Ava's presence in the room was fleeting, her silhouette slipping into the shadows before he could speak, but the weight of the locket lingered in his palm, a tangible link to her pain. Her actions were deliberate, each clue a step in a dance that forced Ethan to face his sins without offering absolution. Their encounters grew raw, charged with a vulnerability neither could fully conceal. One dusk, they crossed paths in Central Park, where the air was crisp and the fading light cast long shadows across the grass. Ethan, driven by a need to understand, had followed Ava's routine, knowing she often walked these paths alone. She stood by the Bethesda fountain, her coat wrapped tightly against the chill, her gaze lost in the water's gentle ripples. The park's quiet enveloped them, the distant hum of the city a faint echo. Ethan approached, his steps crunching on the frost-kissed path, and for a moment, Ava's guard slipped. Her eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with a rawness that mirrored his own turmoil. No words passed between them, but the silence spoke of shared wounds, of a connection forged in pain and possibility. The park's serenity belied the storm within Ethan. The locket, the investigator's report, and Ava's unspoken accusations swirled in his mind, each piece of the puzzle sharpening his guilt. He saw her father's face in his memory now, a vague figure from a forgotten deal, and the realization that his actions had driven a man to his end was a weight he couldn't shake. As a single-dad millionaire, Ethan had always believed his wealth insulated him from consequence. But Ava's presence was a reckoning, stripping away that illusion. Yet, amidst the guilt, a flicker of something else emerged, a longing to bridge the chasm between them, to earn not just her forgiveness but her trust. The thought was reckless, a betrayal of the bet that had brought them together, but it burned brighter with each encounter. Ava, too, seemed caught in the pull of their fragile bond. Her clues, the locket, a dog-eared book left open to a passage about loss, were not just accusations, but invitations, a challenge for Ethan to see her not as an adversary, but as a woman shaped by grief. In the penthouse, their evenings were a delicate dance, moments of closeness punctuated by distance. One night, as rain lashed the windows, Ava lingered in the kitchen, her fingers tracing the edge of a mug. Ethan watched from the doorway, the soft patter of rain a counterpoint to the tension between them. She didn't speak, but her glance held a question, a fleeting vulnerability that dared him to step closer. He didn't, restrained by the weight of his guilt, but the moment lingered, a thread of hope in their tangled story. The investigators' reports continued, each one a deeper cut. Vincent uncovered details of Ava's life after her father's death, years of struggle, a mother broken by debt, a childhood lost to survival. Ethan read the files in the dead of night, the penthouse's silence amplifying his remorse. The single-dad millionaire, who once saw himself as a provider for Lily, now questioned the legacy he'd leave her. Would she inherit a fortune built on others' pain? The thought was a knife, twisting with every memory of Ava's guarded smiles, her cryptic hints, her unwavering strength. He began to see her not just as a victim of his past, but as a force of resilience, a woman who turned her grief into a weapon. Central Park became their unspoken refuge, a place where pretense fell away. One evening, as the first snowflakes dusted the ground, Ethan found Ava on a bench, her scarf loose around her neck, her breath visible in the cold. He sat beside her, the space between them charged with unspoken truths. The park's stillness was a canvas for their emotions, the crunch of snow underfoot, a quiet rhythm to their shared silence. Ava's hand rested on the bench, inches from his, and for a moment, Ethan felt the pull of something deeper than guilt, a desire to heal the wounds he'd caused, to be more than the man who'd broken her world. Her gaze met his, and in its depths, he saw not just pain, but possibility, a flicker of mutual vulnerability that terrified and thrilled him. As they parted, the snow fell heavier, cloaking the park in a hush that felt like a held breath. Ethan walked back to the penthouse, the city's lights blurred through the flurries, his mind a tangle of guilt and longing. Ava's clues, her silences, her presence. They were leading him toward a truth he wasn't ready to face, a revelation that could shatter or save them. In the penthouse, he found a new clue. A single photograph slipped under his door, showing Ava's father in better days, his smile hauntingly familiar. The image was a gauntlet, a challenge to confront the man he'd been. As Ethan stared at it, the soft tick of a clock echoed in the silence, a reminder that time was running out, and the next truth would change everything. The balcony of Ethan Caldwell's penthouse hung suspended above Manhattan's radiant skyline, its twinkling lights a silent witness to the unraveling of a single-dad millionaire's world. In the waning days of November 2025, the air was sharp with winter's promise, and the city below pulsed with a restless energy that mirrored the storm within Ethan's heart. The penthouse, once a fortress of control, now felt like a stage for a reckoning, its glass walls reflecting the weight of truths too heavy to ignore. Months of tension, clues, and guilt had led to this moment, where Ethan and Ava Bennett stood on the precipice of a revelation that would either shatter them or forge something new. The distant hum of traffic blended with the soft wail of a saxophone, a mournful prelude to the storm about to break. Ethan stood at the balcony's edge, his hands gripping the cold metal railing, the city's glow blurring as his mind churned with Ava's cryptic clues. The locket, the photograph, her piercing silences. As a single-dad millionaire, he'd always believed he could outmaneuver any challenge, but Ava had dismantled that illusion, her pain a mirror to his own buried shame. Ava emerged from the penthouse, her silhouette framed against the warm glow of the interior, her presence both a comfort and a challenge. She moved with a quiet resolve, her coat catching the breeze as she joined him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The space between them crackled with unspoken truths, a fragile thread stretched taut by months of mistrust and longing. The revelation came like a thunderclap, Ava's voice steady but laced with a grief that cut through the night. She turned to Ethan, her gaze unyielding, and unraveled the heart of her plan. The marriage, the bet, every calculated step, it was all a design to make him feel the agony her family endured. Her father's suicide was only part of the story. The true twist, the one that stole Ethan's breath, was her loss of an unborn child, a casualty of the stress and despair that followed Ethan's takeover of her father's company. "You took more than a business, Ethan," she said, raw, her words a blade that sliced through his defenses. The weight of her loss, the child she'd never hold, was a wound she'd carried into their marriage, each moment with Ethan a reminder of what his ambition had destroyed. Ethan staggered, the city's lights spinning as Ava's words sank in. The single-dad millionaire, who'd built an empire on calculated risks, had never imagined the human toll of his victories. Guilt crashed over him like a wave, drowning the arrogance that had once defined him. He saw Ava anew, not just as a woman wronged, but as a mother who'd grieved in silence, her strength forged in the fires of loss. The balcony felt smaller, the vastness of Manhattan shrinking under the weight of her truth. He wanted to speak, to beg for forgiveness, but the enormity of her pain silenced him, leaving only the raw ache of his own remorse. Ava's revelation was not the end, but a turning point, a catalyst that forced Ethan to confront the man he'd become. Devastated, he retreated into the penthouse, the city's glow a mocking contrast to the darkness within. Days passed in a blur, each one a step toward redemption. Ethan, the single-dad millionaire, began to act, not with grand gestures but with quiet resolve. He sought out families he'd wronged, offering restitution and apologies that carried the weight of genuine remorse. He visited small businesses crushed by his past deals, funding their recovery with a humility that surprised even Nathan, who watched his friend's transformation with wary admiration. Ethan's daughter, Lily, became his anchor, her innocent questions about fairness and kindness guiding his path. Ava observed from a distance, her heart a battlefield of grief and tentative hope. Ethan's efforts, though imperfect, chipped away at the walls she'd built. Their encounters grew softer, the penthouse no longer a war zone but a space where vulnerability could breathe. One evening, as snow dusted the balcony, Ethan found Ava there, her fingers tracing the railing where they'd stood during her revelation. He didn't speak, but his presence, humbled, earnest, spoke volumes. Ava's eyes met his, and for the first time, they held not just pain, but a flicker of possibility, a shared longing to heal what had been broken. The turning point came when Ava discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that shifted the ground beneath them. The news, shared in the penthouse's quiet kitchen, was a beacon of hope amidst their tangled past. Ethan's reaction was raw, a mix of joy and reverence as he realized the chance to build something new with Ava. She, too, felt the pull of a future untainted by vengeance, her hand resting on her stomach as she considered a life beyond the pain. Their love, once a flicker amidst betrayal, grew into a steady flame, forged in the crucible of truth and redemption. Ethan proposed a real marriage, not bound by bets or secrets, but by a commitment to face the future together. The wedding was a quiet affair, held in a cozy Brooklyn venue where fairy lights twinkled like stars against wooden beams. Gone was the extravagance of Ethan's former life as a single-dad millionaire. In its place was a warmth that felt like home. Lily, her smile bright, scattered petals down the aisle, her presence a bridge between Ethan and Ava's past and future. Nathan, once the instigator of their fateful bet, stood as a witness, his smirk softened by respect for their journey. Ava, in a simple gown that glowed under the soft light, walked toward Ethan, her eyes holding a love that had weathered storms. The vows they exchanged were not just promises, but a pact to heal, to grow, to honor the losses that had shaped them. As they danced under the venue's warm glow, the soft strum of a guitar weaving through the air, Ethan held Ava close, the city's pulse a distant memory. The single-dad millionaire had become a man redefined, his heart no longer bound by wealth, but by the family he'd fought to build. Ava, too, had found peace, her grief not erased but woven into a love that promised renewal. The guests faded into the background, leaving only the two of them, their steps a quiet rhythm of hope. Share this story with friends across America to spread its heartwarming message of redemption and love. Yet, as they swayed, a faint shadow lingered, a photograph tucked in Ava's bouquet, its edges worn, a reminder of her father. The image was a silent vow, a promise that their future would honor the past. And as the music swelled, a soft creak from the venue's old wooden floor echoed, a whisper of possibilities yet to unfold, leaving the door ajar for their next chapter. Share this story with your friends in the US to spread the emotion. Follow our channel, Millionaire Story TV, to discover more dramatic love journeys.